Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Snowflake Office Hours with Stitch, a leader in self-service cloud data integration. Stitch was acquired by one of our partners, Talend, in late 2018. Over the next 30 minutes, we will spend time talking to Jake Stein, former SVP and co-founder of Stitch, and now SVP at Talend. We also have Stan Adams from Talend on the line. Jake and Stan were instrumental in the selection process of Snowflake. They will talk about why they chose Snowflake, including the need to address performance issues, such as long query wait times, crashes, and lockups. And I'm Jeannie Liu. I'm a product marketing manager here at Snowflake. I will be the moderator for today's event. We will hold all questions up till the end of the session, but as always, please ask any and all questions through your chat console. No question is off limits. So Jake and Stan, off to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeannie. Really appreciate it, both the intro and for allowing us to join this today. I'm definitely excited to be a part of this, both as a very happy Snowflake customer and also a partner, so it's neat to be a part of it. So just as some additional background, I was co-founder and CEO of Stitch up until the November of this past year when we were acquired by Talend. And Than, my co-presenter, is our runs BizOps for us. So that means he wears a number of different hats, and the one that's probably most germane to this conversation is that he owns our analytics and reporting for internal purposes and our data warehouse. So he's the one that felt a lot of the pain of the old solution and has been the real power user of the new world with Snowflake. So I think he'll bring a really great perspective as well. So just to kick into it, and to give you just a minute or so of background on Stitch. So what we do is we basically help people get data in where it needs to be. So folks sign up with us, they replicate data from any of, this number's a little bit out of date, I think we're at 100 data sources now, and help you get it into data warehouses and data lakes, and one of the most important destinations for us is Snowflake. So in addition to seeing our own internal need for a powerful data warehouse like Snowflake, we deal with this with our customers all the time. So that definitely helped us inform the problem that we were facing, as well as having a really good understanding of all the different tools out there, having integrated with them, and helped. It actually ended up being a pretty easy decision to choose Snowflake based on all the work that we had done with Snowflake and some of the other tools out there as well. So I'll just dig into what things were like before. So we had been Redshift users for quite some time, definitely years, and I think we were. I remember when Redshift was first announced, we were on the list of raising our hand to say, hey, can we beta test this? Because we had a big pain that Redshift ended up helping us address. And I want to be clear that the purpose of me talking about this is not to say Redshift is a terrible product or anything even close to that. I think it was a huge step forward over the products that came before, and it did help us. And then we ended up running up against some of its limits, and think we've made a big step forward today. So the volume of data that we were storing in Redshift was growing over time, like happens with a lot of companies, and we really had two main categories of challenge with Redshift. The first was just around the time it took from our team to administer and massage and troubleshoot the problems that would come up. And so Stitch was a pretty small team. We were 33 people at the time of the acquisition. Talend is between 1,300 and 1,400, so it's much larger. But in neither organization is there really a dedicated team of people whose full-time job it is to administer the data warehouse. And so the challenge that we saw is that periodically our queries would just stop running, or they'd start running really slowly, or we'd get some cryptic error message that we didn't know, that someone had to spend a whole bunch of time debugging and Googling and figuring out, the disk filled up, or we are doing something not optimally, and then that just kind of ground our reporting to a halt. And in a few cases, it really negatively impacted me personally, where I was getting ready for a board meeting, and there was some number or some set of analyses that I had asked Than to produce, and his hands were tied because we needed to pull the CTO of the company off of what he was doing to help debug this Redshift issue. So it became pretty high stakes, and there was pretty much universal agreement among the team that we needed to find a better solution. But until then, because it was not a snap your fingers and you're migrated situation, we had this interim period where we knew we had a problem and we knew we needed to have a solution, but we had to do some period to set up how we would transition. So what we ended up doing was basically using our data less, because we were worried about, like I said before, filling up the data warehouse or setting up our dist keys and sort keys incorrectly, or one of the other 20 ways that you can shoot yourself in the foot. And so that means that we didn't have, we weren't cut off. We had some access to data, but we weren't using it to its fullest availability. And our mission as a company was to inspire and empower data-driven people. So our whole orientation was around how can we use our data to be more effective. So this was definitely a challenge for us. And so we were not getting the performance we needed. We had issues where we were really stopped up. And so we had this trade-off of we could either spend a bunch of time to try to fine-tune things, or we could, instead of refreshing something once a minute or once an hour, we had to refresh it once a day. And it wasn't ideal. And again, this is what was leading up to us realizing, okay, we have a problem that we really need to solve. So, like I mentioned before, we chose Snowflake, and there's the list of things that we like about Snowflake is very long. We picked out 3 of the most important things because I know most of the time here will be spent on questions, which is I agree with. But probably the single most important thing is auto-scaling. And the fact that you can auto-scale compute and storage independently just completely changed the game for us. And in reality, that in and of itself eliminates 90% of the manual work we needed to do with Redshift, because we really encouraged our team, hey, you may not necessarily know how you're going to use this data up front. That's okay. Try collecting it. Try doing some exploratory analyses. Maybe those will be easy. Maybe those will be really computationally expensive. But experiment. And the problem is that when we were in an environment where we had to scale everything manually and scale compute and storage together, that really limits your ability to be agile. And it limits your ability to try something that maybe doesn't work out and then throw it away later. So the fact that we can scale these both and just start storing additional data is huge. The second thing I'll say is that it was a very happy coincidence that as we were going into the due diligence process with Talend, they asked us about all our internal systems, and we were on Redshift, and we said, hey, just as a heads up, we're just kicking off this process to migrate to Snowflake. And they said, oh, fantastic. They are also on Redshift, and they are also kicking off a migration to Snowflake. So now that we are both on Snowflake, we can securely use data sharing so that the relevant people on our team can get access to the relevant data from the rest of Talend. Similarly, the right folks on the Talend team get access from the subset of Stitch data that makes sense. So we have kind of the best of both worlds, where we have these independently managed data stores, but they can be treated as one cohesive unit where it makes sense. And that has just really simplified a lot of things as we integrate the 2 organizations in the 6 months or so following the acquisition. The final piece that I'll talk about in this slide is just support for semi-structured data. So much of the data that we're analyzing, both for ourselves and for our customers, actually, for them we're not analyzing it, we're just moving it, is data that comes out of APIs. So it's APIs from things like Salesforce.com or Google AdWords or Facebook, and these are all the SaaS tools that we use, or ad networks that we advertise on to acquire customers, and lots of different other things. And it's very often that the data coming out of those APIs is in JSON, and we were loading that JSON data into Redshift, but especially when it's highly nested, there's not native support for JSON data in Redshift. And so therefore we need to kind of do these gymnastics to denest the JSON data, load it and store it as strings or varchars or something similar. And it really makes querying and understanding the data a lot harder. And with Snowflake, that just all goes away. we can load directly into that variant data type. It natively supports JSON. We can search directly within that, and it's really, really huge for us. So this is my last slide before we kick it over to questions. Beyond just the actual, like the list of features, which again, I could go on for a very long time talking about all the features we like about Snowflake, and I'm sure Sam could do the same. But we also, there's just a really good fit between the kind of organization that we want to build and our values as an organization, honestly, with both Snowflake, the product, and Snowflake, the team, and the company. And it's something that's been really refreshing. And, candidly, this wasn't on our checklist of we need to find a data warehouse that has value alignment with ours. It ended up being important, but it wasn't really on our explicit list of criteria. And so, part of that alignment is helping us to align with Talend, this larger organization that we're a part of, but it's also alignment with, what Snowflake is trying to enable and how we have this freedom, because they're taking care of all the management. They're taking care of all the ops, and, scaling is very effortless, so that our team can spend a whole lot more time actually analyzing the data, getting fresh data, doing exploratory analysis, trying out, collecting new data in different ways, or combining with an external data source that maybe we hadn't thought about. And, a lot of those end up not panning out, but that's totally fine, because we can just get rid of the data, or maybe we just leave it stored in there because, it's not very expensive just to store the data there. And if we need to use it in the future, great. And if not, that's okay too. So just enabling that kind of data-driven and experimentation-enabled culture is something we've been really excited about, and one of the other biggest advantages we've seen from really this partnership, both in terms of the customer and partnership in terms of traditional partnership with an organization like Snowflake. So I'll pause there for questions.
Excellent.
Anything I should do, Jeannie, to enable that? Okay, great.
Yeah, we've got a ton of questions, so thank you, Jake. Super helpful. And let me just start off by saying that it's great to see how on slide 3 you were basically using less data, you didn't have full access, but the important point there is now you have full access. There's greater alignment and full freedom. So always good to see success stories. So let's dive in. I've tried to bucket these questions as to the extent that I could. There's a lot of in the weeds questions, so let's start there. First question, what is the largest fact table in terms of row count you have used in your warehouse?
That's a good question. Sam, do you know that off the top of your head? I could guess, but I bet you have better data than I do.
Yeah, and the question was, what is the largest table that we have?
Yes.
That's correct, Sam.
Yeah, I think we have a bunch of event data that's upwards of 30 million rows. I think that probably is our largest one, but I could be wrong about that.
Excellent.
Yeah, my guess was going to be tens of millions or hundreds of millions, so that sounds right to me.
Great. Another product-related question, actually, so is your data model predominantly JSON or relational? Is there any difference in performance?
So I believe that I would say our data model is primarily relational, with definitely a significant chunk of it being JSON. Sam, have you experienced a difference in performance when querying the two?
Actually, I haven't. And one of the coolest things in Snowflake are the tools to query JSON structures. You can very quickly flatten a JSON structure and get a relational output to use in analytics. So, frankly, I haven't seen any performance issues there. It's really fast.
Great. Let's go back to the other list of questions. So this is your previous solution. I'm assuming that you had some on-prem databases. How did you manage hybrid querying, both on-prem databases and Snowflake together?
So we put all of our data into Snowflake. So the data is coming out of, we have internally, we have both MySQL and Postgres databases that we actually host on AWS. But at previous iterations of those databases were hosted in an on-prem data center. Today, they've all since been migrated to AWS. But when we want to query that data, we're querying it for analytics purposes. We replicate it all into Snowflake first. All that data is put into Snowflake. We use Stitch for that. And then we query it directly within Snowflake.
Excellent. Another semi-related question. So when you were actually doing processes like batch-based processes, what's your observation on the performance improvement? How do you compare the performance against Oracle Exadata, for example, or Teradata?
So I don't personally have experience. Like, we weren't using Oracle Exadata or Teradata internally. I can say that before Redshift, we were using basically like a customized version of MySQL. You think about it in somewhat analogous to Aster Data, but not actually that product. And then we've used Redshift, and we've seen a number of customers who are coming from Exadata or tools like that are migrating onto Snowflake. I think the key difference, in my view, is that the Snowflake compute horsepower that can be marshaled for any particular query is right-sized for that query. So you don't necessarily, if you have a big iron implementation of Exadata, I'm sure it's extremely high throughput, and you can, aggregate the same amount of compute power on Snowflake. But if you have a relatively small table and a simple query, you can just power through that at Snowflake at a much lower cost. So I haven't done like a head-to-head performance test, but the nice thing about Snowflake is that you can just scale it up and scale it down as much or as little as you need.
Excellent. Well, we did go through a lot of the questions that were in the weeds, so very interesting. Let's zoom out a little bit, and let's talk about this question here, which was, how did your process and mindset change in how you load data into your data warehouse?
So one of the biggest things is that we do basically essentially three things with our data warehouse. We load raw data in, we do transformation within the data warehouse, on that raw data, and then we have reporting and analytics that hits that transformed data. And with Redshift, we had to be pretty careful about the timing and sequencing of those, because you could inadvertently run a query on data that was untransformed, or you could just time them incorrectly where you would hit a bottleneck. If the transformation was running, that was using all the compute, and so your reporting queries would get locked up. And so you just needed to think about that schedule, and as a consequence, we only ran those transformations once or twice a day. Now, since with Snowflake, if nothing is happening, we don't pay for any compute, and then we can optionally go from nothing happening to all three of those things happening simultaneously, and it's fine because just the three needs for compute will spin up at whatever time they need to, and then spin down when they're done. So it's really nice for us to just basically not have to worry about that sequencing and resource allocation that we needed to think about before.
Excellent. And a related point to that, so one of the things you mentioned was autoscale, so essentially the ability to scale compute and storage independently. And this question was really around your thought process. So did you use large set of smaller instances that basically give you the flexibility in price and performance, or did you immediately go to large instances? How did you decide this? Was it trial and error? And were there any surprises when it comes to cost? So loaded question there. So basically the first one is about the environment. The second is your decision process and any surprises when it comes to cost.
So it's a great question. Fan, I'll kick it over to you to see. I bet there's some of these that you have some particular insight into.
Yeah. So I think we approach this from a couple different ways. At first, we know that in Snowflake, and this is something that's worked for a lot of our the Snowflake and Stitch shared customers, is having multiple compute nodes for different tasks on the database. So you would have, a BI tool that hits one compute node, and then you'd have, the transformation process that Jake referred to, you'd have that running on another compute node. And basically what we decided to do was just have one compute node to start with, and start off with that and see, what the performance was like if we had the same problem with collisions and lockups. And I can honestly say we haven't felt the need to spin up more compute nodes. And we know that one warehouse will have to pretty much run extremely often. And it was pretty easy to predict that price using the price, the cost calculator that the sales team helped us with at Snowflake. So I wouldn't say that the cost was a surprise. And the architecture, our actual setup and implementation ended up being a lot simpler. And it's really great to know that we can scale up in the future if we need to.
Excellent. Thank you, Stan. And a related question, so when companies are looking to estimate compute, how would you go about that? Any advice you can give? Did you find in your particular situation, did you underestimate, did you overestimate? What were some of the learnings there?
Yeah, so I think, like Stan mentioned, it's been roughly in line with what we originally expected. We kind of, we figured of a base case and realized, depending on how fast our data volume grew and what latency was tolerable to us, we might need to go above that. The other thing that I don't think I've mentioned yet, but was an important part of our migration and onboarding with Snowflake was, I guess there's two things. One was, just the POC, where anybody can just sign up for Snowflake and start running data through it and, just seeing what some things. And obviously that's not a full, complete picture of what your post-migration life will look like, but the speed at which you're able to start actually seeing what things are like is really dramatic. It's literally minutes. The other piece is that we worked with an SI, a systems integrator, on our migration. It was a firm called Bytecode, and it was really, really helpful to have someone who is in the weeds with the complexities of this all day, every day, where Stan is, super talented and knows our data inside and out. But in thinking about how should we compare costs from Redshift to Snowflake? How do we think about the data structures? Working with an expert, in this case Bytecode, was something that I would definitely encourage folks to explore.
Great, thank you. So this question comes, again, another zoomed out question. So on slide 3, you mentioned that one of the problems was limited bandwidth to actively administer fixes, I think a problem that a lot of companies face. So this question is, do you have any DBAs for Snowflake in your org today? If yes, could you please share what their responsibilities are as far as Snowflake is a SaaS solution, as we all know? And some DB activities are actually automatically taken care of. So how has their role evolved or changed over time?
So we do not have any full-time DBAs for Snowflake. Fan is one of a handful of people who, occasionally dip their toe in and do, some traditional DBA stuff. But Fan, would you say, what percentage of the data warehouse work outside of analytics, but just like the grunt work of making sure the wheels stay on the bus, how much of that has been taken off your plate or Chris's plate or anyone else who's been responsible for that in the past?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the answer is that we really haven't had to do anything. I think the most work I've had to do was go in and grant a permission for somebody or for one of our roles. And so my time went from, several hours a week to, this week it was about 5 minutes to go in and do the permission. So, in terms of how that's going to change over time, we don't know yet, but right now it looks like it looks pretty great.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing I'd add is that, there is a whole bunch of stuff that we are doing with that data. And so analyzing it, reporting on it, piping it into other places, sharing it with the rest of Talend. So there's still lots and lots of stuff for folks who work on data to do. But in terms of the actual oh crud, this query is running slow. What are we going to do? Or we're getting this error message. Yeah, that's pretty much just kind of gone away.
Excellent, Jake. To piggyback on that point of, oh crud, this query is running slow. So have you been able to automate the detection and altering of long-running queries?
That's an interesting question. Fan, have we done anything like that to your knowledge?
No, I mean, the only thing we have set up is auto scaling on our compute, and that pretty much, when and this is covered more, pretty extensively in the Snowflake docs, but the high level is that it's Snowflake is aware of the query load, and like Jake was saying, it'll just add more juice as needed. I think is the technical term. So yeah. So I honestly, I don't think we've really had to do much in that respect either.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add is, we've been up and running now for, in like full production, having all of our reporting switched over from Redshift to Snowflake for maybe 2 or 3 months. So, it's entirely possible that as our data volume grows and as we, do more and more on top of it, we may need to troubleshoot it, but it's been, really remarkably smooth for the initial testing period as well as the following couple months.
Excellent, great to hear. So let's dive into that point, which is really around information or data migration. So a couple questions related to that. So what are, again, no question is off limits. So what were the biggest hiccups during migration? And were there any negative surprises?
I would say it took a little bit longer than we expected. So yeah, we were actually, Fan, you were closer to this than I was, but do you recall any major hiccups or just unexpected gotchas that you had?
Yeah, I think, and this is more just a symptom of moving from one database to another, but we discovered that a lot of our data, the structure of some of our data in Redshift, wasn't going to look the same in Snowflake. And by that I mean, where we use Stitch to load our data before, we used it to load our data into Redshift. And so the JSON data was split out into subtables. And when we went to migrate that historical data into Snowflake, we realized that since Snowflake, it's really great, it can accept the JSON field, but we were going to have to take that data and put it into the proper JSON structure before inserting it into Snowflake. And I think we, in some cases, we were taking those subtables in Redshift and cobbling them together and inserting them. And I think that took a little bit longer than we had thought. And there was some other nuances there just by nature of how we collect the data. So that took a little bit longer than we thought. And I think a big part of it was refactoring our transformations. There was a lot of code we had to go through and just make sure, some of the time zones are different in Snowflake than they were in Redshift and so on. So, again, nothing really major, but just things like that I'm sure everyone on this call can relate to if they work with data every day.
Absolutely, Dan. Another question related to migration. So do you have any relational database at all currently? And if you have not migrated any of your data, why is that?
So yeah, we migrated all of our data from Redshift to Snowflake. A bunch of the data that we had in our Redshift data warehouse and now have in our Snowflake data warehouse is relational, so it's coming out of MySQL or Postgres. And then we've also got a bunch of other data that is pulled from APIs or ad networks or event data from our application where users click around and do stuff, and we store that. So we've got a big mix inside the data warehouse, and in that original migration process to Snowflake, we basically pointed our Stitch instance at the new data warehouse to have data going forward replicated, and we had Stitch just replicate all of our historical data, and then there's a certain subset of the data that we couldn't do that way, and so we basically just lifted and shifted that over to Snowflake manually. But yeah, we migrated it all.
Excellent. We are at the 30-minute mark, but there are still a flood of questions coming in. So for everyone on the line who needs to drop off, thank you for joining. I will continue. So we'll get into a couple of company-related questions which came in that are very interesting, but let's go back to yet again more product-related. So currently, do your data analysts query JSON directly, JSON data which is stored in the variant column type, or do you end up flattening them into structured data before querying?
Fan, I'll defer to you on that one.
Yeah, we flatten them almost all the time for use in our BI tool or just ad hoc querying.
Excellent. So the company-related questions, Jake, probably more for you. So how does Stitch fit in with the Talend product stack? Are you thinking of Stitch going to be available with open source? What is sort of the roadmap on your mind?
Oh, for sure. It's a great question. Yeah, just on the open source point, one of the reasons why we believed that Stitch and Talend were a great fit is that we both have open source roots. So Talend started as an open source project and still has a really active community and a version of the product that's available free and open source. Similarly, for Stitch, we have this open source Singer project that allows anybody to use any of our integrations whenever they want, from the command line, even if you're not a Stitch user. But thinking about like the main products, the commercial offering, the vision is really to have Stitch feel like a cohesive part of Talend Cloud, which like the Talend Data Fabric, which has a number of different apps in it already. So there's data integration and data prep and data quality and data catalog. Those are all like apps within the Talend Data Fabric. And Stitch really focuses on ingestion. So we get the data from all the different places it lives and then lands it in the warehouse or the lake, and in a great many cases, including ours, Snowflake. And then once that data is in there, it needs to be transformed, it needs to be governed, it needs to be shared, and set up APIs and rules around that and cataloged for compliance purposes. So we really see it as like the jumping off point for getting all your data into one centralized location like Snowflake, and then using the rest of the Talend suite to do all those value add services on top of that data, which is very much in line with how folks were using us before, where they land with Stitch and then add all these other products. It's just now we can do it as part of one cohesive team with an integrated product suite is the vision.
Great. Jake, this is a related question. I think you may have already answered it, but any unique or specific use cases of both using Stitch and Snowflake outside of what you already mentioned?
So one of the things that I've seen among our customers is that there's a lot of different cases where Snowflake shines, but one of the key ones is when there's a really large number of stakeholders. And so that might be just a very large team where you have 1,000 people who need to refresh their dashboard to get their data. But very often it's also where there's external reporting, like you have a BI tool on top, and the company is reporting out to their customers using the data that they have in Snowflake. And so Snowflake really shines in that case because there's no concurrency limits, and you can spin up as much compute necessary in order to support all those different external people who want to view the reports and analyses. And then that dovetails really well with one of Stitch's features, which is the ability to basically programmatically embed Stitch inside of other products. So if a company has their own internal data and they want to collect data from their customers, let's say they want to incorporate all the data from their customers' Salesforce.com accounts, they can use Snowflake to power that data set. And then they can use Stitch to basically collect all the data from their customers' internal systems and then marry the vendor's data with their customers' data all in Snowflake to use it for reporting, which, without that Stitch ability it's called Stitch Connect. It's an API to programmatically use us, and Snowflake's, arbitrarily scaled concurrency. This is the sort of thing that would be just completely impossible, 5 or 10 years ago. But now we see an increasing number of customers doing really, really cool things with it.
That's so great to hear, Jake. I do want to get to this question because there's been multiple people asking this, and if it's basically cost of ownership. So when you look at your Snowflake instance today versus Redshift, just directionally, how do you assess it?
Sure. Yeah. So the most naive comparison, if I were to not actually look at anything beyond just like the contract we had previously had with Redshift and the contract we entered into with Snowflake, just to be completely transparent, the contract with Snowflake is for a higher dollar amount. But I consider us to be saving a tremendous amount of money by using Snowflake, even though the explicit dollar value that we're paying for that is higher for two reasons. One is that we were just not getting what we needed at the old price point. So it's like I would be willing to sell anybody a cell phone plan for much lower than you're paying right now. I just won't give you service. And so nobody, I think, would be excited about that deal. So we knew, we were not getting what we needed before. The other thing that I really, can't overstate is just the value of our team's time. Like we have some very talented people on staff, many of whom, were able to figure out all the different data warehouse challenges we had, but this was not the highest and best use of their time. And so that now that we, can take fans hours and hours every week down to occasionally 5 minutes, and that goes for multiple other people on our team as well, it's really just transformational how much of their time we get back to work on other stuff. And similarly, we get to, answer all these questions that we didn't answer before and have faster access to data and all the different reasons. So for me, like the ROI of, even though our nominal bill went up a little bit, it was not a challenging decision at all about that this was going to be like a highly ROI positive investment.
Excellent, Jake. To your point, a cell phone with no service just sounds awful. Even slow service is awful.
Great point.
So we've gotten through a handful of questions that just came in recently. There are two more that I do want to get to, and then we can end it. There have been a couple of questions from the same about the same use case, which is basically how you're backing up and restoring what you have in Snowflake. What are the strategies in place today?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I missed part of it.
Yeah, so directly could you please talk about your back-end restore strategy for Snowflake?
Our back-end restore strategy for Snowflake. Dan, do you have thoughts on that?
Sorry, backup.
Oh, backup. Oh, okay, got you. Well, actually, I'll kick that over to Dan as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming we're talking about data backup.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess, we haven't done anything special for that. There's some neat features in Snowflake, like time travel, and other things that can help, mitigate the concern over, something bad happening to your data. But we haven't done anything specific, in that.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add is that, all the data in Snowflake is backed up by S3, which we have a very high degree of confidence, and we have separately used that as a backup store for us. And so we have not gone down the path of cross region replication, but we haven't had an issue. And the other thing that's noteworthy for us is that all this data is in the source systems too, and so we could potentially just re-replicate it if we need to. Totally would understand why some other companies might need to have an additional separate backup, but having the data stored in S3 is good enough for us so far.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Stan, and thank you, Jake. This last question is, will the recording be sent out? Absolutely. I saw that there's a bunch of questions that just came in. We are 10 minutes over time, so I appreciate everyone staying on the line. A special thanks to you, Jake and Stan, and we'll see you at the next office hours. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for the free trial at trial.snowflake.com. And see you at the next office hours. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you.